The shack sat at the edge of a forgotten road, the kind of place the world looked at once, then forgot forever. But for Marcus Hale, billionaire, business titan, and man who'd spent his entire life in glass towers and marble hallways, it was the first place in years where silence didn't feel like a suffocating punishment. He hadn't planned on disappearing. Life had simply cornered him. The divorce headlines, the betrayal of his closest business partner, the death of his mother, it all broke something inside him that money couldn't repair. He bought the shack in the countryside not because it was charming, but because it was worn, quiet, and honest. It smelled like wood smoke and dust. The floors creaked beneath every step, as if testing the weight of who he was and who he'd become. He liked that. It reminded him he was still real. He arrived with no servants, no staff, no paparazzi. Just 2 bags, a worn jacket, and a phone he'd shut off the moment he'd crossed the city border. For once, no one wanted anything from him. At least he imagined so. Until he heard the sound of crying. It was faint at first, a soft, heartbreaking whimper, drifting through the wind like a memory. Marcus paused mid-step. Crows scattered from the fence, wings flapping against the air as if warning him. He held still, listening. There it was again, not one voice but 2. Babies. He shook his head, telling himself it must have been the wind carrying sound from a far-off house. But when he walked toward the back of the shack, he saw movement near the abandoned garden. A small young woman with dark skin sat on the old wooden bench, her posture tight with exhaustion, clutching 2 small infants bundled in faded blankets. She looked terrified, like someone who had been running for a long time and finally ran out of road. Her braids were messy, her clothes worn but clean, and her eyes, they weren't the eyes of someone broken. They were fierce, determined, but tired, so tired. One twin whimpered weakly. The other clung to her shirt as if it was the only safe place left in the world. Marcus froze. He had walked into boardrooms filled with sharks, faced hostile media storms, lived through corporate wars, yet in front of this fragile scene, he had no idea what to say. The woman flinched when she noticed him, tightening her hold on the babies. "Please," she whispered hoarsely, voice trembling, "we'll leave. I just needed a place to sit for a moment. They haven't slept. We haven't eaten." Her voice cracked. "Please don't call anyone." Marcus didn't speak at first. His throat felt thick, and the cold air around them held still. Something inside him softened in a way it hadn't in months. Here he was, a billionaire hiding from his own life, and here she was, a mother trying to survive hers. "I'm not calling anyone," he finally said carefully, like he was afraid his voice might break too. "Are you all right?" She blinked, surprised by the kindness instead of judgment. "We're fine," she lied quickly, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "We just need to rest. I'll go." She tried to stand but nearly stumbled as her knees buckled. Marcus stepped forward instinctively, hands raised for balance, not touching her, just letting her know she wasn't alone. "Sit," he said gently. "No one's forcing you away." She hesitated, tears forming behind her tired eyelashes. The twins whimpered again, tiny fists rubbing at tiny eyes. The wind rustled the brittle leaves around them. Marcus opened his jacket slightly, feeling the cold bite him. This wasn't what he came here for. He came to escape, not to face someone else's broken pieces. But he couldn't walk away. Not today, not anymore. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She clutched the babies closer. "Aaliyah," she whispered. "And these are Isaiah and Imani." The twins, as if on cue, let out small coos. Marcus exhaled slowly. Aaliyah, a mother, alone, hungry, afraid, and somehow stronger than anyone he'd worked with in decades. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked. She shook her head just slightly, not enough to fully admit, but enough to break him. The world had taken so much from him lately. But watching her, he realized the world had taken even more from her. Maybe life wasn't punishing him. Maybe it was humbling him, preparing him. Or maybe fate just brought them to the same forgotten place because they both needed shelter, just in different ways. Aaliyah looked at him again, bracing for the worst. Instead, Marcus stepped aside and nodded toward the shack door. "Come inside," he said quietly. "It's cold. The babies need warmth." She stared at him like she wasn't sure whether he was real or a cruel trick. "Why?" she whispered. "Because," he said softly, "everyone deserves a place to breathe." Her lips trembled. Then, with a shaky exhale, she nodded and followed him inside, clutching the twins like her entire universe fit in her arms. And as the old wooden door creaked shut behind them, neither realized how life-changing this encounter would become. The shack's warmth wasn't much, just the ghost of heat left in an old wood stove and four walls that did their best against the cold. But for Aaliyah, stepping inside felt like stepping out of a storm she'd been trapped in too long. She lowered herself carefully onto the worn sofa, holding her babies with the same protectiveness a soldier holds a shield. Isaiah whimpered. Imani blinked sleepily, their tiny breaths shaky but alive. Marcus moved awkwardly around the small space, unsure what someone in his position was supposed to do. For years, everything in his world ran like a machine. People catered to him, solved problems before he even noticed them. Now here he was, face to face with a problem he couldn't throw money at, because the problem wasn't poverty alone. It was fear, exhaustion, and a soul clinging to hope by a thread. "Are they hungry?" he asked finally. Aaliyah nodded, embarrassed. Left in a rush. I thought I had more formula, but... Her voice faded. The rest didn't need to be said. Sometimes life doesn't run out of time. It just runs out of mercy. Marcus opened a cabinet, grateful for the supplies he'd stocked out of habit rather than intention. "There's milk," he said. "And food." She looked startled, as if she expected him to say no. He warmed the milk, nervous hands fumbling with bottles he hadn't touched since childhood memories of his sister's baby. "You're very kind," she whispered. The words didn't feel like a compliment. They felt like something else, something heavy, like she wasn't used to saying them. Like she'd learned kindness wasn't free in this world. Marcus sat across from her, watching quietly as the babies finally drank. Relief washed over Aaliyah's face, like sunlight breaking through clouds. But beneath it, something else lingered. Wariness, a lifetime of surviving people who smiled before hurting you. "Did you run from someone?" he asked gently. Aaliyah's shoulders stiffened. "From life," she answered softly. "From things people don't come back from." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't push. Instead, he studied her, the faint bruise fading beneath her sleeve, the way she kept one hand hovering protectively over the babies, even as they fed, ready to shield them at any second. She'd fought for them. That much was clear. He remembered what fighting looked like. Not physical battles, but the kind where the world tries to break you and you refuse to fall. He'd lived through boardroom wars and betrayals that taught him power wasn't about money, it was about endurance. But looking at her, he realized resilience had many faces, and hers was the bravest he'd ever seen. Aaliyah leaned back slightly, exhaustion settling over her like weight. "I don't know what to do next," she admitted quietly. "I didn't have a plan. I just ran, and now I'm here." "Sometimes," he said softly, "running is the bravest thing." She blinked, almost surprised he didn't judge her. He didn't know her story yet, but he could sense enough. She wasn't irresponsible. She was protecting her children from something or someone cruel. "If you need to stay for a day or two, you can," Marcus said, surprising himself with the tenderness in his tone. "I won't turn you away." Her eyes widened, glassy with disbelief. "You don't even know me." "Sometimes," he replied quietly. "You don't need to know a person to see they need help." Aaliyah swallowed, her voice trembling. "Nobody ever says that," she whispered. Marcus looked toward the window, thinking about the world he'd walked away from. A world where help came attached to conditions, contracts, and power plays. Maybe the world needs to say it more. Silence settled between them, warm and human. The twins finished feeding, tiny bellies rising and falling peacefully. Aaliyah's body loosened for the first time, like she finally allowed herself to breathe. Then softly but suddenly she began to cry. Not loud sobs, just quiet tears that slipped down a face that had been strong too long. "I didn't want to bother anyone," she whispered. I had nowhere left." Marcus looked at her, at two sleeping children, at a woman who had risked everything for them. And in that moment he knew. Helping her wasn't charity. It was purpose. It was human. He stood, pulled a blanket from the closet and placed it around her shoulders. "You're safe here," he said, "for as long as you need." She looked up at him, and for the first time trust flickered in her eyes. It was fragile, but it was there, Outside, the world remained cruel, noisy, unkind. But inside that little shack, a strange thing happened. 2 broken lives found a pause. Not healing yet, not fixed. Just paused. Enough to breathe. Enough to hope. Enough to imagine that maybe fate didn't bring them together by accident. And the fire in the wood stove crackled quietly, as if agreeing. Marcus woke up before sunrise the next morning, the chill of the countryside seeping into the room, and a strange stillness reminding him this wasn't his penthouse, wasn't his world of polished floors and silent elevators. This place creaked, breathed, and felt alive in ways the city never did. For a moment he forgot anyone else was there, until he heard a soft humming. He followed the sound to the small kitchen area. Alia stood there in the dim light, bouncing one baby gently, while the other slept in a makeshift crib lined with one of his sweaters. She was humming a lullaby, voice low and warm, the kind of sound that carries through childhood memories and sleepless nights. She stopped when she noticed him, tense at first, as if she wasn't sure she still had permission to exist in this space. Marcus raised a hand slightly, not to stop her but to ease her fear. "It's okay," he murmured. "You don't need to be quiet." Alia nodded but didn't speak. She looked unsure of her own presence, like she expected kindness to expire. He walked toward the stove and started making coffee. "You didn't sleep?" he asked. "A little," she whispered. "They wake often." She said it gently, not complaining, just stating reality. He noticed now how tired she really was, the kind of tired you don't fix with one night of rest, the kind that settles deep in the bones. "When was the last time you had help?" he asked quietly. Her eyes dropped. "Never," she said. "Just me." Marcus looked at her, at the steely, quiet strength in her posture, the exhaustion behind it. He'd seen CEOs break faster than her. He poured her a cup of coffee, and when she hesitated, he nudged it toward her. She wrapped her hands around it like it was the first warmth she'd felt in a long time. A silence fell, not awkward, just heavy with things neither had said yet. Then Alia inhaled shakily. "I didn't run because of money," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I ran because he said the next time I tried to leave, he'd take them from me." Marcus's jaw tensed, not anger at her confession, but at the world that forced her to speak it. "The twins' father?" She nodded once. "He's powerful. People believe him. And I was stupid enough to love him once." Marcus leaned back, realizing her fight wasn't just survival, it was escape from someone who thought control was love. He knew men like that, wealthy, entitled, dangerous not because they had power, but because they believed they owned it, and everything around them. "You weren't stupid," he said, voice steady. "You trusted someone who didn't deserve you." Alia blinked, fighting tears she didn't want to show. "People like him don't lose," she whispered. "People like me don't win." Marcus felt something shift inside him, a quiet fury at a world that worked that way. He had spent his life thinking power was earned, fought for in boardrooms and strategy rooms. But here was a woman who hadn't been given a single tool, yet she still fought harder than executives who had everything. "I lost everything recently," he said slowly. "At least I thought I did, but maybe I just lost the noise." She looked at him carefully, as if trying to believe someone like him could understand someone like her. "Losing noise sounds better than losing safety," she murmured. "You found both," he replied. "You found safety by running. That's strength, not loss." She stared at him as if his words were foreign in a world that had only spoken doubt to her. A baby stirred. She shifted gently, patting a tiny back. Marcus noticed her fingers shake with fatigue, and without thinking he held out his arms. "I can hold him," he said softly. Her eyes widened, not out of fear but surprise. No one had offered before. She hesitated, then slowly placed the sleeping baby in his arms. Marcus froze for a moment. Billionaire, dealmaker, a man who once measured days in profit margins, now holding a tiny, fragile life wrapped in a faded blanket. The baby curled against his chest with trust he didn't feel he deserved. And in that moment, Marcus realized something. The world didn't break him. It brought him here. It stripped away everything loud, so he could finally hear something real. Alia watched him, and for the first time there was something new behind her eyes. Not fear, not suspicion. Hope. Outside, the morning sun finally touched the shack, spreading gold light across the worn walls, like a promise whispered in silence. For the first time in months, Marcus didn't feel lost. And for the first time in months, Aliyah didn't feel alone.